Okay, Chapter 4, Activity-Based Costing, Lean Operations, and the Costs of Quality. ABC costing is a major innovation in managerial accounting, and it's something used to get a better idea of what's really causing your costs. So in this chapter, we're going to start out looking at a plant-wide overhead rate, and then we're going to take it apart and use a departmental overhead rate. Okay, so from plant-wide to departmental, which puts it into a couple buckets, and then after that, we'll learn how to use an activity-based costing system. Understand the benefits and limitations, then describe lean operations and the use of costs of quality framework. The real heavy lifting, though, is up here in the beginning of the chapter. So why and how do companies refine their cost system? The reason why they refine it is because it doesn't give you real cost. Products are overcosted and undercosted, and if you use this allocation to set your prices are going to be incorrect. A traditional system takes one rate and applies it to everything. Okay, and that's not really the way cost is incurred. So who can refine? Who can benefit from this? Manufacturers, service companies, and governmental agencies, because different activities cost different amounts. Okay, so if you want to get a handle on your costs, you've really got to know where they're caused and how you can control them. So here's an example of a plant-wide overhead rate. This is what we did before. Okay, that we've got a predetermined overhead rate, and we take the total estimated overhead divided by the total estimated allocation base. Okay, our overhead for a year is $1 million, our allocation base is $62,500, so the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate is $16 per direct labor hour. Okay, so it's $1 million divided by $62,500 direct labor hours. That gives us $16 per hour. So here I've got a job. Okay, now we apply this to job costing. This is a company that makes ellipticals and treadmills. And here's our plant-wide rate per direct labor hour. The actual use is $10 a piece, and so the overhead allocated to the job would be $160 each. Okay, based on using one rate. Now here's a cleaner example without a lot of stuff in it. This is Cato Company. It manufactures catnip because this cat loves to get crazy. And his total overhead is $10,000, and he allocates the overhead based on cat labor hours. Cats work for about 1,000 hours per year. So we've got $10,000 divided by 1,000 hours of work gives us $10 per direct cat labor hour. Okay? And the overhead includes like fertilizer, electricity, things like that. So here's an example again of the departmental overhead rate. We've got our $1 million, and it's divided up between machining and assembly. Okay, do two different things. So we find out that $1 million is spent in different ways. We spend $400,000 in machining and $600,000 in assembly. Okay, and see what happens is these two products use different amounts. Like the machining, there's only one direct labor hour, and the elliptical, on the one direct labor hour of machining and 9 direct labor hours of assembly. Okay, on the treadmill, we've got 4 hours of machining and 6 hours of an assembly. Okay, so the totals might be the same, but it's the allocation between the two different products is different. So do they use it to a different extent? Yeah, they do. All right, the two departments are different. Okay, we've got sort of 5 direct labor hours here in machining, and over here we've got 15 direct labor hours. So departmental overhead rates establish separate manufacturing overhead rates for each department. So think of it, instead of having one bucket that's just one big blob of overhead, now we've got 2 buckets. One for machining and then one for assembly. Okay, so that's what Life Fitness here is going to do. So estimate the total costs incurred in each department, pick an allocation base that makes sense for the department, calculate the overhead rate, and then allocate it, okay? Try to keep this simple for yourself. The book has a lot of steps, but you really don't have to worry about it that much. All right, you've got department rates per department, figure out what's going to drive the cost in each department, and calculate the rate, okay? Then multiply it out times the actual usage. And here's the departmental overhead rates example for the elliptical. In machining, we've got $400,000, and in assembly, $600,000. So the total manufacturing overhead is $1 million. Okay, for machining is the allocation 12.5 direct labor hours, and assembly 50,000. Okay, so that's very different. So here I've got our total costs per pool. We're using direct labor hours in both. It doesn't have to be direct labor hours. These things could be different. Okay, but for the departmental overhead rate, I've got $32 for machining and $12 per hour per direct labor hour for assembly. Okay. And now we're going to allocate it to the job based on their actual amount. Okay, don't forget, actual amount of labor. That's really important to remember. Okay, so it's an allocation that based on estimates, but we multiply it times the actual amount. So here is our rate based on the estimates. The actual use was 1 direct labor hour for machining, so $32 to the elliptical. And then for assembly, they've got 9 direct labor hours at $12 an hour. That's 108. So $140 of overhead is allocated to the elliptical. It's the elliptical, right? Yeah, it is the elliptical. Here's the treadmill down here. Let's make this a little bigger. The treadmill has, okay, the same 32 and 12 per direct labor hour, only they use 4 hours of machining, 6 hours of assembly. Okay, and this machining is expensive, so the overhead allocated is $128 and 72 or $200. Okay. All right. So $140 to the elliptical and then $200 to the treadmill. Now, if you were using a traditional overhead method, you might and these were both say the same because they both use 10 hours. Okay, then you might underprice the treadmill and overprice the elliptical, okay, just based on that those overhead allocations. And here's Cato again, all right? He's got planting and harvesting. This is the cat's weed. The planting department has 4,000 of overhead, and they use 200 hours, cat labor hours, so that's $20 an hour. Harvesting department uses 800 hours, that's $7.50 an hour. Multiply it times the actual usage, and you get a better price for your catnip. Okay? So instead of having 1 bucket, we've simply got 2. That's all it is. All right, and this is another pretty good chart. So look, these are indirect costs is the plant-wide manufacturing overhead of $1 million. We've divided it up in departmental cost pools for machining and assembly, figured out the rates, 32 and 12, okay, and then done an allocation to a cost object. The cost object is an elliptical and a treadmill, okay, and that would keep going. Alrighty. So here's the distortion, all right? This is what the plant-wide rate improves on, is that if we use the plant-wide overhead rate, they both had 10 hours of overhead, right? So that would be $160 for each one. If we use departmental overhead rates, then our allocation is $140 and $200, okay? A really big difference. So the elliptical would have been $20 overcosted, and the treadmill would have been $40 undercosted. All right, so if you're using those cost numbers to come up with your prices, you're going to be way out of whack. And you're not dealing with true things that you can improve. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to stop there, and I'll do ABC in the next video.